All right, hello everybody joining us live. We're gonna wait a full minute, maybe a little more, so people can log on. But in the meantime, settle in, I guess. Yeah, there's always this 1 minute where we're just kind of nodding at the camera, waiting for the live to actually start.
Well, this is a good time to call in some good, strong Wi-Fi connections and some good data.
Exactly. That's for sure. Yeah, hopefully I don't cut out, but that's it. That's the nature of things.
We're all used to it at this point in the pandemic, you know, we're all very used to Zoom calls and pixelated voices and faces.
I feel like I live on Zoom calls. True. Those flattering frozen faces. If you're joining us live now on the live, we are not going to be talking about frozen faces for the whole time. We will be talking with Vanessa Prescott about being a herbalist, being an indigenous herbalist. We're going to be talking about Chantel more. We're going to be talking about a lot of different things that intersect with climate justice, which is what Fridays for Future Toronto fights for. But because there's so much in climate justice, this is a very important talk. So in about 30 more seconds, we'll start more officially, but welcome if you're joining us. And we take questions, so at all times, if you want to put questions in the question box, our very cool tech person, Sophie, will relay them to us.
Perfect.
Okay. All right, now is our official start. So hi again, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us for one of our weekly strikes. I was going to try to figure out which number it was, but we've been in social distancing for so long that I forgot. But one of our digital strikes. My name is Ali. I organize with Fridays for Future Toronto, and I will be co-hosting this today with Salome, if you want to.
Hi there. My name is Salome, and I work with Fridays for Future.
Yeah, thank you. And today we are really excited to be, I guess, interviewing, but having a conversation more than anything with Vanessa Prescott. And so Vanessa, if you don't already know of Vanessa, is a Métis clinical herbal therapist on, and correct me if the pronunciation is not right, Lekwungen territory? Lekwungen territory. So her heart of gold is cherished in her community, and you'll get her smile is contagious already from the Zoom call, but she has the highest level of formal herbalist training available in Canada, is actively working to decolonize her practice and connect people to the land. And she believes that the hard conversations are worth having and that together is how we heal. Vanessa, welcome. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here today. And I have lots of family watching. I have my mom watching, my grandma and my granddad, and friends with kids, which is really, really nice because it reminds us to bring this to a level that all people can understand, which is really, really important.
That's such an important fact. Salome, maybe you want to get us started and kind of situate us for this call?
So before full on starting our conversation, we would like to acknowledge the land, Turtle Island, that's been the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Wendat, the Noden Noshowene, and the Mississauga of the Credit First Nation. I myself, I'm a settler. I came here with my family in 2007, and it's incredibly important to acknowledge the history of the land and including the oppressive and violent process of colonization and the effects that it's still having today and with the struggles of Indigenous people. And if anybody else would like to jump in to add their piece.
Yeah, thank you so much, Salome, for that land acknowledgement. And I just want to talk about the importance of land acknowledgements that really have that level of depth that you just brought, because sometimes you'll hear a land acknowledgement that feels very robotic and dry, and it's just kind of checking a box. And when we do a land acknowledgement, we are doing that to honor, respect, and recognize those first peoples who are on this land. And to recognize that that's not a thing of the past. You know, I'm on Lekwungen, and I am so, so grateful to be here living and practicing on Lekwungen territory. And there are Lekwungen people who are thriving strong, and I see you, and I thank you, and I'm grateful to be here.
Yeah, thanks so much. I think with that, I mean, similarly, the first time I came to Canada, which was a few years ago now, I come from France originally, and France has obviously this huge colonial past, but in the other way of Canada, it colonized the world, and we're still grappling with it, and we're really not talking about it enough. And in the past few weeks, we've talked about it more, but we're still very, very bad at talking about it, honestly. And so when I came to Canada the first time, I'll be honest, I heard people talking about reconciliation, and I heard my university do land acknowledgements, and I thought, ooh, a country that actually cares. And I stayed here for like a few weeks, and I realized it was actually very performative in many ways. And especially my university, they would say the same land acknowledgement every day. And I thought, wait, that didn't change since yesterday. There's no depth. Then I realized every time the people would pronounce the names differently. And I thought those professors who've been doing the land acknowledgement for 20 years have never learned how to pronounce the names or have never been corrected. And so I realized that exactly what you said, Vanessa, and Salome did, is that we had to actually believe when we acknowledged the land that we were doing it because it was worth doing, and not because, well, that's good, now we can do our event and now we can do our ceremony.
Exactly. Yeah. And I kind of would think of a land acknowledgement like when you go to someone else's home and you are a guest in their home, and to treat that like you are a guest and to show up with respect. And that is the way that we need to be walking on this land. And that is the mindfulness that we need to carry in our hearts while we're on this land.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
So, Salome, do you want to get us started with a question?
Yes. So, in a nutshell, what does being a clinical herbal therapist mean?
Yeah, so it's something that I love because the title really explains what it is when you break it down. So the clinical aspect shows that we've done the clinical training. So I've learned how to do physical examinations. There's a very strong clinical aspect to my training. The herbal, the fact that I work with plants and traditional plant medicines. And then the therapy aspect is very, very important to me. And what that really entails is holding space for people, being able to truly listen to people. And the way that I listen to someone is a way of listening that I would say I would give that credit to my mom. You know, when I listen to each patient that is before me, I listen to them the way my mom would listen to me. Like, I really bring that matriarch energy, and that is an energy that can be passed down through all lineages, but to really hold that space of I'm here for you and I'm listening. And that is the first step of where healing can occur. So one of the biggest things with herbal medicine for me, it's like I am there to hold space, and I am there to connect people with the right plants that are the right medicine for them. You know, like I'm just kind of a vessel in that process. And I feel like that's really something to look for when you're thinking about a clinical herbal therapist to work with. I would recommend looking for someone who isn't going to give themselves credit for your healing, somebody who knows that that healing work is internal and your own, and they are there to support you.
Yeah, that sounds wonderful. And I was hearing you and I was thinking maybe our government officials need to all do some training on how to be clinical herbal therapists first, because you said listen to the other and hold space and then listen to what they need to heal. And that sounds like what the reconciliation plan should be, no?
Yes. All right.
What you? Maybe you should be in charge of that task force too, honestly. But I think you're starting to point to that by talking about the matriarchal energy and lineage, but you talk a lot about decolonizing herbal therapy, and that was almost a surprise to me because I kind of assumed it would be mostly indigenous led at first. Then looking into it, I did see that a lot of white people again are taking space in that. So would you be willing to explain a little more about that?
Yeah, so like you said, I do have the highest level of formal herbalist training in Canada. And I am so grateful to have that education. And there is so much to know when it comes to herbal medicine because herbs do have contraindications. There are certain personalities that shouldn't be paired with the personalities of certain plants. There are certain constituents that can be highly aggravating for certain conditions. There's plant allergies, there's herb drug interactions. There is a lot to have up in your brain. And thankfully I have a good brain for it. I have a very rabbit hole-y brain, and it's very, very necessary. To be in this field, you have to pay attention to detail. You have to be thorough, because if you're not, it can harm people, right? So there's a lot there. And with that said, that's not to turn anyone away from herbal medicine or to make anyone afraid of herbal medicine. Plants can be so incredibly gentle and are not to be feared. And herbal medicine is ancient. No matter what your culture is, your ancestors healed themselves with plants. And when you look at what plants have given us in life, plants have given us shelter, they give us food, they give us fuel and energy, they give us spirits, they give us so many things. They give us drugs, they give us medicine, they clothe us. And yet I'm still trying to convince people that plant medicine works. People know coffee wakes them up in the morning. People know you smoke a joint and you'll get high. But it's hard for people to believe that herbal medicine works. That right there is colonialism.
That's very interesting. I didn't even...
Coffee.
That's very interesting. I definitely heard that narrative before of like, it's not real, or like I've been given for, anxiety or things like that as intermediate. They were like, you take this before you get to see, and they've used words like a real doctor or things like that. But the real doctor pills don't necessarily work, honestly. So that's a very interesting way to explain it.
Yeah, so I like to get people thinking about plants or plant-based things that have an undeniable effect that nobody can deny. And then to think that's just one plant. And you look at all these other tinctures in my little apothecary here, and you think, well, once you understand that each of those plants has a whole combination of constituents that is more intelligent than science can even understand. And beyond that, they have a spirit that you could spend a lifetime getting to know, and it will it's like a person, right? You could spend a lifetime getting to know a person, and there will always be new things to learn about them. So bringing all of that back into decolonizing medicine. So my education, I'm so grateful for it. And there are things that are very lacking. And I would say, the way that herbal medicine is taught academically needs to be reworked to center the roots of herbalism in our studies, to study the Black roots of herbalism, to study the Indigenous roots of herbalism and the herbalists of color who really did the groundwork for us. And beyond just recognizing people, recognizing our animal ancestors, like echinacea, one of the most common known immune herbs. It is said that the properties of echinacea were learned by watching snakes fight. And the snake who would lose in battle would curl itself around the echinacea plant to regain its strength.
Wow.
So even to raise our hands to the animals that have helped to teach us about plants, that is part of decolonizing medicine too.
That sounds wonderful.
Yeah, it's quite incredible. Like, we don't really think about it because we're not taught about it, and ever since childhood never like, it's always modern Western medicine that you go to, and it really undervalues herbal medicine, and it's the one that started it all, like the roots of even modern medicine today. So very insightful. So
Mhm.
what would you say are steps that you would like to see for us to achieve decolonizing medicine further?
Yeah, so I think one of the first steps for people who are harvesting medicine is to acknowledge the traditional territory that you are harvesting that medicine on. And even for people who aren't harvesting, even for people who are watching this today, right now, do you know the traditional name of the territory that you're on? And this is a call in. This is not calling anybody out. This is not to shame anyone who doesn't know. This is calling you in, saying, hey, are you in Shawnigan Lake? Because that's where I grew up. That is Shawnee's territory. And that lake is one big spirit bath that I spent my childhood in. And that is a territory that is known for cedar harvesting and salal berry harvesting for medicinal purposes. Just, encourage yourself to learn the traditional name of the land and a little bit of the history of that land. That's a really good, simple place to start to recognize those people. Second would be to acknowledge privilege. And for me to acknowledge privilege too, like I'm Indigenous, I'm Métis, but I have, pretty light skin. I can definitely be white passing. I also have the privilege of an education. And education can also be a colonial thing, which is an interesting thing to think about. But sometimes people think that their lived experience through academia is more valid than the lived experience of somebody who has traditional knowledge. And that's just not true, because there are so many ways of gathering knowledge. And the deepest teachings that I have had with plants, they were not in a textbook. They will never be in a textbook. They aren't even going to come to you from a teacher or a mentor. They are going to come to you through a plant, working one-on-one with a person. I actually know every single consultation that I ever have, I get goosebumps at least once. There is always a chilling moment of synchronicity and alignment where I am covered in goosebumps and I'm just like, I feel my heart blasted open. Wow. And those are the moments of truth, right? Those are the moments that can't be taught. When you see the resonance between a person and a plant, when you recommend the right flower essence for somebody and they feel seen to the point of tears being in their eyes, that is medicine. That is good medicine.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I love drawing parallels that are never perfect, but sometimes help. And you mentioned it before, when you get to know a person, you can read their bio and some stuff. Even, celebrities, you can read their whole life online, but then you meet them and there's something different. And I guess it's the same in the similar matter. If you're not like spending time and effort in it, you won't get to know it.
Mm-hmm. And one of the questions that is most important to me that I don't ask directly, but is in my heart when I'm holding space for someone is, what hurts you the most? Because if you can gently find that out or get someone to start thinking about that, there is a lot that can come forward. And the metaphysical causes of illness are one of the things that very, very, very early on in my education, I knew I was going to specialize in, because I saw it again and again when I was doing patient intakes and case histories, where something would happen in someone's life and part of their heart or part of their spirit would change and physical symptoms would soon follow. Mm-hmm. Because everything is energy, right? Like our thoughts are energy. When we have something that really hurts us, the matter in our cells changes and our bodies carry that. So if you can find someone who can hold a space for you where you feel safe to look at that, and they can make you feel held through that, that's where healing occurs. And then you bring in the plants, right? Then you bring in the constituents that can calm your nervous system, that can help to regulate digestion, relieve inflammation, all of that. And then you bring in the flower essences that can speak to different parts of our spirits with a gentleness that not really many other things in life can achieve. And it's pretty profound, the things that can happen. I will say that.
Definitely. I see, like, I have personally experienced if my mind is not in an okay state or very ill, it definitely affects me physically. And once I get better mentally, like the smallest little things, it can be just energy even, starts to come back. But people really don't think about the connection of it, and especially because mental illnesses are still a stigma, and we're just now starting to talk about it more to normalize it and see it as an equal to physical illnesses. But the thing is, they're both connected to each other. So I feel like if you reflect on it individually, like people can definitely see the connections. You just have to watch out for them because nobody really tells you it. Like it leads to what you were saying about formal education. There's so many things missing that are like essential. So we have to come out of our way to learn about more, and especially the history of of the land that we're in. That because we're settlers, and we have to respect that and be mindful about it every single day, not just once in a while when you are doing land acknowledgements, but you can do them to yourself to remind yourself and not just take it for granted.
Yeah, because I think with academic studies, people are indoctrinated to think from their head, right? It's very logical, evidence-based. We're looking at big clinical trials, and it's very intellectual in the head. And decolonizing is coming from the heart instead, coming from your intuition, coming from your gut. And we can use science. We can use science and decolonize simultaneously. So one of the things I really like to tell people about is the gut brain. So just like we have an extensive set of neurons in our actual brain, there is a set of neurons in your gut, in your abdomen. So like right here. And it is so extensive. They've actually discovered that rather than your brain sending more nerve impulses to your gut brain sends more nerve impulses to your brain. And that communication happens through the vagus nerve, which is the 10th cranial nerve. It's a crazy nerve. You should definitely check it out on a diagram if you haven't already. It innervates the brain. It innervates every major organ in your body, your heart, your lungs, your guts, your genitals. It is wild. So I like to get people thinking about the gut brain because you can use science to actually trust yourself. When you have a gut feeling, when you have an intuition in the pit of your stomach, when something makes you feel from your stomach, that's true. That can be real. And, you know, the mind can play tricks there too. The mind can have anxiety and fear that can make people, you know, hold negative thoughts in their gut as well. And it can be tricky to discern between intuition and fear. But intuition is a gift. It's positive. If you have something that you feel in the pit of your stomach that's positive, it makes you feel good, trust that. If you have something that feels bad, that feels negative, that's fear. Don't listen to that, right? Don't listen to that fear and that doubt. Push that aside and just trust that intuition. My papa always says, listen to your heart, my girl. He says the brain can say a lot of things, but you have to listen to your heart. And that is decolonizing. Listening to your heart is decolonizing. It comes to body sovereignty, land sovereignty, sovereignty for people, sovereignty of medicine. All of that comes into personal autonomy and taking power over these things for ourselves.
Yeah, and I think that also leads us to understanding how much harm colonization has done on people's bodies and minds, because we've taken away land where they used to find those medicines, right? And we've taken away, and I mean, maybe that's a a way to transition towards talking more about Chantel Moore, but someone went in, a Edmonton police officer, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, went in for a wellness check. And
yeah, so Edmundston, so New Brunswick.
Edmundston, yeah. Went in for what is called a wellness check, and that is performed by armed officers in so-called Canada. And so what, I don't know what your initial reaction was to that, what as a professional who talks about wellness all the time you felt, but I'm sure it was a lot of emotions and feelings.
It is absolutely horrific. That should have never happened to Chantel Moore. And we need to be talking about this because we must demand justice for Chantel Moore, for her family, for all Black, Indigenous, and people of color who have been targeted by police, who have experienced police brutality. This isn't new. This has been happening for so long. Finally, we are uprising against it and recognizing it. But we must hold those officers accountable. We must hold pressure on those officials until we receive answers. We absolutely need answers. There is a 6-year-old daughter without a mother due to police brutality. And this is a woman who is from Vancouver Island. She's from Tofino. She's from Cleoquet land, Cleoquet territory. And it's so heartbreaking. It's unacceptable. And we all collectively need to make sure that justice is had.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where real allyship, because we always try to hear, a lot of our viewers are like us, settlers, and often white settlers. And so we try to give cues to where we should be directing any energy or outrage. And that's where real allyship comes in, is calling out the people that look like you and are in the police force, and the people that maybe you do know officers. And so it's hard for you to say defund the police, but if you really meant, if we really mean we wanted to be allies, like we said during in solidarity protests, because I know a lot of our viewers were part of these protests, we also have to kind of put our neck out further and go against, it was kind of easier to go against the RCMP because it was far away, and it was so overtly bad that it was kind of easy to denounce. But how do you denounce it when it's much more similar to you? So I'm glad you reminded us that it's really our job to demand justice. And
it is. And one of the ways that our viewers today can honor Chantel Moore, there's actually going to be a healing gathering for her. If you're local, if you're viewing from Lekwungen territory, next Thursday, June 18th at the legislature, there is going to be an event to honor Chantel Moore. And so this is also to acknowledge racism and police brutality. And, online too, you can honor these things without actually attending physically, right? You can make a sign, you can take a photo and post it on social media for the event. Her mother has asked that we wear yellow to honor her, and that the message that's put forward is to echo love and not hate. So these are movements that people can join in no matter where you are, right? You don't have to be on Lekwungen territory to honor Chantel Moore. You can use your voice and speak up about this wherever you are. And just to bring that home, she's not a name, she's not a hashtag. She's a human being who is like any of us. Imagine that was your best friend. Imagine that was your daughter. Hold that kind of justice, hold that kind of accountability, and fight for that person, because if we don't, that could be your daughter, that could be your best friend. So this really falls on us as the people.
Definitely. And pardon me, and I think we have to continue pressuring the police on police brutality, because it's not okay. It hasn't been okay in the past at all, but it keeps on happening. And their actions they are taking or saying they're taking isn't enough, because we still see it. And we don't want another life taken just because they didn't go far enough to address it. We have to go as far as enough as we can, because it's not okay at all. Just
Mhm.
thinking about, a lot of people can't connect as much, especially with the news, since lately it's been so hurtful and cruel. But you always have to sympathize and be like, um, what if I was her best friend? And if you think
Mhm.
about it that way, you connect to them. I know it's really hard because you try to separate yourself a little bit from the news to not get as hurt. 'Cause
Mhm.
it takes toll on people mentally, but what you do, at least what I do, to feel better is to fight and do my part in every single case. But since you know a lot about mental health, what do you think or propose wellness checks should be done apart from the police? Because obviously they don't know how to do it well at all.
Yeah, I think in the nature of that question, it's going to vary a lot depending on who that wellness check is being done for, right? What the mental health of that person looks like. And that's going to be different for each person. The police being the ones to do that wellness check, especially for an Indigenous woman, is problematic to begin with, because Indigenous people have been targeted and oppressed and victims of brutality at the hands of police for since the RCMP were created in the first place, right? So that in itself is problematic. So we need people who are trained in mental health to be the ones who are doing those wellness checks. People who have the sensitivity to meet someone where they're at. People who can read bodily cues, right? People who can meet someone where they're at, people who are not going to inflict violence.
Is it correct or worthy to say that there is huge value in having someone from that community be the trained professional that goes to see that person? I'm always imagining that.
Yes.
I know for me, it's much easier to have any healthcare professional be a woman, for example. I know it's always been that way. So I'm imagining that in many cases, that would be preferable as well.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, I would say definitely a female may have been a just a better option, right? If you had a woman go in and do that wellness check, if you maybe had an Indigenous therapist go in and do that wellness check, there are so many other avenues than a police officer who would do what that officer did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think maybe quickly circling back to where we were before, and I think it's really strong what you said about fighting as if it was someone you deeply, deeply cared about, because
Mm-hmm.
it's true. Even if we have that first outrage, we kind of allow it to let it go.
Mm-hmm.
Some words that helped me were when it was on the day in which we honor missing and murdered Indigenous women, and the elder that was speaking said, "Look at the friend you came with and tell them, I will look for you if you go missing." And I mean, I tear up every time, because I looked at my best friend in the eyes and I said, "I will look for you." And I realized I rarely have that fear that she would disappear, because she is
Mm-hmm.
not an Indigenous woman and her life is not like that. And I don't know, those words really forced me to care much more after, because I thought
Mm-hmm.
how horrible that some families have to actually say that to their daughters
Mm-hmm.
or sisters.
Yeah, it's a reality, and it is something that I've started to talk about a lot in the last year. And it is so close to my heart, because my sister was a missing and murdered Indigenous woman. She was murdered in 1998 when I was 5 years old, and she was 21 at the time. And I talk about that quite a lot, not to garner empathy for myself, but to show people that this is here. This is real. This affects the lives of people in your community and people you know. I recently got this eagle pendant to honor my sister, and so I wear that for protection over my heart. And it was actually at the Stolen Sisters March just this year that my dad and I grieved for the very first time about my sister's death. Because when I was younger, I was only 5 when it happened, and she was brutally murdered. The details were so horrific, I will not say them here, but she was 6 months pregnant at the time. So it was actually 2 lives that were taken. And when my dad and I finally grieved together, neither of us realized how much of that hurt we had been carrying. And I had processed that grief largely on my own, especially, you know, when I was becoming a woman. When I was 13, I would cry alone and process that alone because I was too afraid to talk about it with my dad because I didn't want to re-traumatize him. Mm-hmm. And it's good to be aware of re-traumatizing people. It's also, it's something we don't need to be afraid of talking about the hard things. When someone dies, if you have a friend who's lost a family member, we don't need to be like, oh, I'm never going to talk about their dad because it might be a sore spot. We need to remember those people. We need to talk about those people. So for my dad and I to go to that march together, that was the first time him and I had ever cried about that since that happened. You know, and that was a long time ago. That was 22 years ago. And we needed that healing so much. We needed it so much. I couldn't even keep it together that day. We both were just in tears. And the most beautiful thing was to realize that together is how we heal. That was the day that that saying came to me, because I saw our pain reflected in the eyes of so many strangers. And that actually really hurt me, to look out and see people staring back at me with a look of like, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. That hurt me because it showed me how much pain we carried. Mm-hmm. And normally I would carry that pain alone. But when you see your pain reflected in the eyes of so many people, held that pain. You're holding that pain for me right now. Everyone, we are holding that pain together collectively. And whatever your pain is in your heart, you deserve for that pain to be held. Like, no one should have to deal with their pain and their trauma alone. And so that is kind of the overarching theme in activism, in social justice, in decolonizing, in herbal medicine, in sovereignty, is that we are in this together. We need all hands on deck.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Vanessa, for trusting us with all that information.
Yeah.
I don't know if you had planned to share it live on screen, so thank you for doing that to us.
I think it's really important that people don't hide who they are. And that has been the biggest lesson. So I've been in herbal medicine now for 8 years since I initiated my studies, which is wild to think about. That is that's some anti-level status right there. But one of the things that was the most important for me was, you know, when I first started practicing, I felt like I had to be this sterile clinician all the time, that I couldn't have my personality show. If you were talking to me, I was clinical herbal therapist. Who wants to see that? People want to see a clinical herbal therapist who's going to make them laugh, who's going to meet them where they're at. I'm a silly person. I love poetry and music and lyrics and beauty, and that's who I am. And when I was kind of holding all of that back from my practice, I was holding my medicine back. Mm-hmm. You know, when I bring poetry into the consultation room, when I look at someone with poetic eyes and see them as poetry, that's medicine. And each of us has our own unique medicine. So I would really encourage all of you to not hold that medicine back. Like, this movement needs your medicine, whatever your medicine is. We need you.
I love that. And I do think every single person is unique, individual, and they all have something different to offer us. And do not hold back. Don't feel shy about it. And like, every single one of us has so many, like a rainbow inside kind of thing, like so many colors and joy, and sharing all of that and like unity is extremely important, especially in fight with when fighting for justice in like critical issues, because it can be hard holding all of that alone and holding it all in and not really talking about it with your friends. But it's a conversation that you have to have, and it will definitely help you get stronger to fight the battle. But in talking about all of this, there has been a lot of conversation about defunding the police as a solution to help. So how do you feel about that personally?
Yes, defund the police. So this might sound strong worded for anyone who's like, oh my God, defund the police, abolish the police. What's happening? Why are we defunding the police? We need the police. They keep us safe. Do they keep us safe? Do they keep you safe as a privileged person? Did they keep Chantel more safe? These are questions we need to ask. And defunding the police sounds radical when you say it, yet education has been defunded again and again and again. Things that need funding desperately. Arts programs in schools. These are things that are defunded all the time. Sorry, there's no funding. Clean water in First Nations communities. Sorry, there's no funding. Police, there is so much funding and people are still dying at the hands of police brutality. So the only appropriate thing to do right now is to reallocate those resources. These police forces need training. They need, I will say that a little differently. They need training in mental health and therapy where they can meet people where they're at and avoid this kind of violent brutality altogether, right? Like there's something seriously missing. We need to reallocate those resources to community organizations that can help to actually reduce crime in the first place, right? So the police are there to punish people, essentially. They're there also, you know, ideally to keep the peace. Unfortunately, it's often to punish. So rather than have police forces come in and crack down on people, we need to reallocate funding into stronger and more resilient communities where there's less crime in the first place.
Absolutely. And especially when so many of those crimes are poverty related crimes where the police is arresting people because they're poor. In many cases, it is not that they are dangerous for the society. And I mean, honestly, I like that you addressed the fact that some people find it radical, because my whole life I heard of reforming the police as the thing to do. And when the first person, I think it was Sandy Hudson, who created Black Lives Matter in Toronto, who came out with several articles saying we need to abolish it and defund it. And I thought, that's what are we going to do? And then, well, first of all, I started reading a few articles and, I realized all those points that you made. If you reallocate the resources, crime rates go down because we're doing the right thing. I read so many cases of where the police created harms, created violence against women, create things. And then I tried to think of any time where I've had interactions with the police as a white person in a white neighborhood. And I realized the only time I could think of was when one time 5 police cars showed up and we're going around the neighborhood for a while. And eventually I'm very curious. So I went out and I said, what's wrong? Are we is there anything wrong? They said, oh, one person broke into a house. Have you seen them? And I was like, well, that's your job. But I mean, if they broke into a house an hour ago, why are you still circling around the neighborhood? And I realized we were paying 10 officers for 2 hours to circle my neighborhood for something that had long gone. And so I realized I've never really had a useful interaction with the police. And so in a way, I don't know what I'm scared of defunding it, because I've never had a useful one.
Thank you so much for clarifying that. Yes, poverty is something that needs to be looked at, right? So when we're talking about reallocating finances, finances need to be going into things like homelessness, access to food. Those two things are so basic, right? It seems like a complicated conversation for some people where it's like, oh, defund the police. I don't know. What do I need to learn about that? Reallocating resources. What do people really need? They need food. They need housing. They need water, right? Those are very, very basic things. They need mental health. They need access to mental health resources. These are things that need funding. Having 10 police driving around your hood, that doesn't need funding. Someone needs housing. And I'm not saying all police, I'm not gonna swear. I'm in a webinar. I'm not saying all police are bad, right? I'm not. And this might be controversial, you know, as an Indigenous woman to say, I don't think all police are bad. I say that because I have a vivid memory of being 5 years old the night my sister was murdered, watching the police keep my dad from going into that house where she was murdered and discovering the state that her body was in. Mm-hmm. Those police weren't bad. They arrested the man that murdered my sister. They attended my sister's funeral. The RCMP did. They were there for her burning, right? So I will not say all police are bad. I have called the police when I had to break up one of the most violent, traumatic things of my life. I had to save the life of the person who brought me into this world. And I had to call the police that day. And they were there, right? So I'm not saying all police are bad. And I think that is an important part of the dialogue too, right? I'm here to call people in. And I think in this movement overall, we need to be calling people in. Calling people out, that creates more division, right? And even how we're speaking today, we're not going to have all the answers. We're not going to know all there is to know. And that's why we need all of you, right? Each of us knows what we know. And I hope one day we look back at this recording and we're like, oh my God, did I say that? Did I say that? Ooh, we have come so far. Mm-hmm. I know we will. That's just inevitable, right? Like if we're dedicated to self-growth and, you know, improving the world as a collective, that's just inevitable. We're going to look back at this and be like, okay, we did good, but we're doing so much better now, right? So I think the lesson that everyone needs to be mindful of right now is a lesson in humility. None of us have all the answers. We're not always going to say the right thing. And fearing saying the wrong thing, letting ego hold you back. You can't allow that. It's better to say the wrong thing and have someone gently call you in, right? We can't be calling each other out. Do not call people out. You can be angry, you can have passion, and please try and, you know, convey that in the most gentle way possible, because we need everybody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you know, in a way, I think that's the approach that the police failed to have for many years. Is they would not let it stand corrected. Unions would not let, and I usually love unions as an organizer, but those unions would not stand corrected or increase transparency. And so eventually, yeah, it leads to entire groups of people fearing you, despising you, being triggered by your uniform. And yeah, I'm glad you brought in humility, because I think that's
back.
We are back. Your video is still frozen, but oh no, it's back.
There we go.
There we go.
So
we were talking about frozen
face at least when it froze.
No, it was so nice. It was just a pose. Not even fair. You're a natural Zoom attendee. No, but I think I was essentially done saying that what you're encouraging us to do at a personal level is what was lacking for all of us. Our governments do not stand corrected, and then we get really angry because we're not listened to.
And I believe it's important to understand that we're all gonna mess up in life, because there's always more that to evolve in, to educate ourselves in, and a
Mhm.
lot of people individually, like I feel like a lot of people don't like activism because oh, it's a touchy subject. I don't want to get into it, or they don't want to say the wrong thing and have someone um, criticize them. But it's important to acknowledge first, super important to speak up and not ignore or let things go by just because they don't affect you
Mhm.
personally. And I feel like if we do that all as individuals, understanding that it's okay to mess up sometimes, we're not perfect at all, then the system will get better because if a police does something wrong or someone, it's quite general to be honest, but they won't be afraid to speak up about it because their commanders are going to be acceptable, like accept as I don't know the right word, but accepting of it and of their
Mhm.
mistake, and even goes further. It's like I respect you now even more for coming, like saying I didn't know this before, I did something wrong, but I acknowledge what I did and I won't do it again, or I will learn, I will grow and dedicate myself to further educate myself in this.
Mhm.
I feel like that's how slowly, if we make that more okay to mess up,
Mhm.
to not be perfect, then the system, like people in those, because in the system, there those are people. It's just they're so scared, and that's why so many things go under the rug. So
Mhm.
very important.
Yeah, it's so important to really center humility right now. It's so, so important. And also to keep an open mind and to stay fluid in our opinions and to stay fluid in our beliefs. We can't get too rigid in any one way of thinking or too set in stone in any one way of thinking because new information is always coming up. New lived experiences are always coming up. So all we can do is do our best until we know better, right? And then we'll keep doing our best. And we might believe something and then we learn a little bit more information and think, ooh, you know what? I don't really believe that anymore. But rather than keep fighting for something, even though we know it's a little bit wrong, we need to have the humility to be like, I was wrong. I didn't know.
Mhm.
I'm sorry. I will do better. And to encourage everyone to do that. And like you said, normalize that, right? Systemically normalize that. Normalize that at a systemic level.
Yeah. Well, we're about 10 minutes away from the end of this. It was already a beautiful and very inspiring conversation. I do want to give you maybe a chance to tell us a little bit more about a more recent project you've been working on, which I believe is the Wild Green Sovereignty
Yes.
project. So please
Mhm.
enlighten us.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it. So this is an idea that I've had for the last 8 years, but I had never had enough time to actually do it. So Wild Green Sovereignty, I started this project after doing the 3C challenge, which is a challenge for Indigenous youth, so under 30, which I am just barely an Indigenous youth still. I'm 28, even though I feel 5 years old at heart. But this is put on through Service Canada, University of Victoria, Gustafson School of Business, and the BC Aboriginal Friendship Association. So what the 3C challenge was is basically you could put an idea forward and Indigenous youth could decide if they wanted to be a part of your idea or a different idea or put an idea forward themselves. So the idea that I put forward was Wild Green Sovereignty, which is a totally wild harvested greens powder. I did bring a jar so I could show you, do a little plug. Where's my camera? I am a grandma. I am not very good at this. So yeah, this is Wild Green Sovereignty, and then it's a greens powder. I can just put it in my water and show you actually.
Look at this. We're becoming influencers at the same time. This is a
I
dream.
wish I had something to stir it with. I don't, but this will be a good, authentic
Ooh.
representation of does it dissolve? How long does it take to dissolve?
There is no effects, guys. You're watching this live.
So, Wild Green Sovereignty, you would not believe how many plants fit in this jar. PS, it is crazy. So plants when they're growing, they have a lot of room for water in their cellular structure. They have a lot of room for air. So when you think about it, when you steam a bag of spinach, right? How small it gets. And now imagine what you steamed, dehydrated and powdered. Like, that's what's in this jar, but all wild plants. So it's been really cool. The vision of Wild Green Sovereignty is to connect people to the land, right? So land back. And also to fill nutritional deficiencies and gaps within our community to bridge the gap between accessibility and traditional plant medicines. So the goal with Wild Green Sovereignty was to create a greens powder that people can buy, and then also to donate single-use biodegradable greens packets to communities in need. So whether that's our unhoused population that needs funding when we defund the police, or whether that's Indigenous peoples on the front lines for, say, Wet'suwet'en, or any kind of solidarity actions. We want to get medicine to those people. And sometimes having a big glass jar like this it's not the most practical for a lot of unhoused people. You know, I think about my dad being like, oh yeah, so I lost that greens powder you gave me, eh, my girl? And it's like, Dad, that was an expensive jar, like, come on. But if you get single-use packets out to people, they can just put them instantly into their water, boom, done, right? So getting as many packets out to people as possible. For our first run, so we launched this, we sold out within 10 days of launching. And people hadn't even seen the product, people hadn't seen the packaging. That was really, really humbling, because that showed me that people had faith. Like, people trusted my name, right? It's like, okay, cool, if you're doing that, I trust it. And the way to garner trust is to be authentic, right? That comes back into being yourself. If you speak from your heart, if you're just you, if you're just real, no one can ever take that away from you. People can think whatever they want, but if you're real, right? So that's what Wild Green Sovereignty is. And for our first run, we were able to, our packets are actually getting packaged right now, but it's going to be roughly 350 single-use packets. So some of those are going to be donated to Uprising Medicine Project here in Lekwungen, which is allocating medicine for BIPOC folks, so Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And we are open to other areas that we can be donating to. I have lots of ideas, but if anyone has anything in particular, we're definitely centering Black folks at this time. Other little side note, when you are writing about Black people, one little grammar thing I just want everyone to be aware of, capitalize the letter B, please. If you are using a lowercase b, you are talking about the color Black and not Black people. Capitalize that B. When we talk about Indigenous people, we capitalize the I, capitalize the B. But yeah, sorry, that was a lot. I have a lot to say about Wild Green Sovereignty. So yeah, you can check us out on Instagram. We have a landing page if you want to read up about all the ingredients. Yeah, lots of traditional medicine, focus on invasive plant species. So that also goes into decolonizing medicine and just getting people thinking about medicine on our own lands, that superfoods aren't something we need to be shipping in from far away, where often there's a lot of injustice that happens where these superfoods are coming from, right? Like there's violence happening. People are actually dying where, you know, there's banana plantations and things like that. So to actually use superfoods from our own land that are invasive species, to weed those out and get them to the people who need them, it's just like, it's a natural progression of what needs to happen.
That makes so much sense when you put it that way. And the link to the website to Wild Green Sovereignty will be in the YouTube chat, so folks can also click on that. And maybe just, you mentioned, maybe a very last question, you mentioned that, so part of it was kind of a donation, and part of it people, I think, purchase it. Is there a way that people can donate to that donation part? How does it work? Is it part of the purchase that goes there?
So the medicine itself, we've donated completely out of our own time. And then when people are buying the jars, that's just going into supporting Indigenous youth. So myself and my other team members. We did do a raffle to collect some donations to cover the packaging costs. And we are currently accepting donations to cover more packaging costs because the machinery is expensive. It's $160 an hour to clean after the packets. So we are accepting donations, and those could just be sent to the Wild Green Sovereignty email if anyone so feels inclined. The one thing I do want to mention, I can taste the powder actually. The one thing I wanted to mention about the powder is, so the power of these plants, when you look at medicines that grew on these territories, these are the medicines that kept our ancestors alive, right? Like that's power. Mm-hmm. There is so much more density of phytonutrients in these wild plants than anything you will get cultivated. So that's just a cool thing to acknowledge. And it's really good. It tastes like, well, there's vanilla leaf in here, so it tastes a little vanilla-y, and then there's lemon balm and mint and powdered rhubarb. And we're going to be doing a different one each season. So sadly, this one will never be available again. But we have one jar left. I think we're going to do a giveaway, but I think I want to do a, what's it called when people bid money on something? So not my, yeah. Maybe we'll do it, or a fundraiser. We'll do a fundraiser with that jar so that we can use that money to create more greens powder for people in the community. I think that's what I want to do. So there will be one jar up for grabs. What else did I want to, oh yeah. So for the summer formula, there's going to be wild berries. There's going to be huckleberries and salmon berries and rose petals and horsetail and all sorts of greens. And we're going to be doing a new one each season. So I'm very excited. And I know we're almost out of time, but we are out of time, but there's one other thing. It's kind of like a land acknowledgement, but on a body sovereignty level. I just want to honor the people who brought me into this world. I got to honor my mom because she has an absolute heart of gold. She is the reason that I am able to show up and be selfless and hold space for people. So thank you, Mom. I want to honor my dad. He is Mr. Fix-It. He can fix anything, also heart of gold. My grandmother, she has always been a huge activist for social justice. And I feel like just this year, I'm finally stepping into my role as her granddaughter. I'm sorry it took me so long. And my granddad, who is so intelligent, he was a teacher. He knows how to educate. His granddad was a chemist. There's a lot of chemistry in this line of work. So I want to honor those people that have brought me here. And I walk their walk, you know? I am the absolute culmination of those people. So I just wanted to honor them too. And Mr. Fix-It, this system is going to require a whole lot of fixing. So we need all you. We need all you.
All you to become Mr. Mrs. Fix-It. Yeah, I like it. I love it.
Mr. Mrs. and non-binary fixers.
And
we
all of us. We're going to become fixers. I really like it. Thank you.
Fixers and fighters, guys.
Fixers, fighters, healers. All of that, what Vanessa taught us. Salome, maybe you have a last few words before we kind of close it.
I just wanted to thank you personally. I loved the insight that you brought. Definitely learned a lot. Can't wait to just reflect on it and think about it more and rewatch this, to be honest, because
yes.
My expectations were like high because I was like, oh, this is so cool. But like in reality, everything that unfolded, wow. I loved it so much, learned so much. Thank you for being with us this morning.
Yay.
Yeah,
that makes me so happy to hear, because honestly, life is disappointing so often. So when things exceed, not an expectation, but when things exceed an idea that you thought it might be, that is the best. So thank you so much. Merci is Michifer. Thank you. So thank you.
Really, it's close to the merci in French that we would say. Well, thanks a lot to both of you. I mean, Vanessa, it was incredibly insightful. You say all of this with so much, grace and kindness, and at the same time, I know my heart has just been touched by this whole conversation. So thank you, and Salome, thank you, because I know it's one of the first times you're hosting or co-hosting a live, and I'm just so excited to see you do more of these. So thanks. And as always, we don't see Sophie in the back. That is the reason this live stream is live streamed. Otherwise, I wouldn't know how to do it. So Sophie, you're very awesome. Thank you so much for doing it.
Thank you, Sophie.
Thanks, Sophie. We love you. And folks watching, I hope you were inspired. I hope you were moved. And I hope you will remember the key messages, which were really to be humble, fight for Chantel more and to all the others as if they were someone that you are close to, and that you all have your part in this movement. So just take that role right now. All right, folks. We'll talk soon, hopefully, all of us, and have a lovely weekend.
And one last thing I would like to say, just for the friends and family who are watching, I would just like to share something in my traditional language, which is Métis, which is kind of a mixed language of the Métis people. And it is how to say I love you always, which is Shakiten Tapitao. And I'll say it again. Shakiten Tapitao. I love you always. Thanks, guys.
I love it. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.